I'd like to order french fries, a burger, and a milkshake.
This is a library.
I'd like to order french fries, a burger, and a milkshake.
Pathos, or emotional appeal, is one of the three elements of rhetoric, the ancient art of persuasion. Humor is an emotion, and in this advertisement, Mercedes used it effectively to draw people to their product, and it worked. The first time I watched it, I laughed too, but then something felt wrong, so I took a deeper look. Using Erwin Panofsky's first level of iconology, I broke down each image, searching for context, clues, and pure form, examining the obvious, the visual particulars. The most obvious detail is the pretty blonde. She's perky, upbeat, and openly friendly, the brightest spot in the scene. She places her hand on the wooden counter, leans forward, and speaks loudly, as if she's ordering food from a McDonald's takeout window. Her voice lacks sophistication. In fact, it's almost crass. In sharp contrast to the blonde, the librarian is unattractive and unfriendly. The monochromatic beige of her clothing is drab, and with her dark hair, she blends into the library's neutral shades. Her nonverbal cues are priceless. She's a great actor. The way she raises her eyes without moving her head indicates a snobby demeanor. It gives the impression that she rarely looks up from her work to serve anyone, but the blonde's question is so obviously ridiculous to this woman that she can't help herself. Although she doesn't express it verbally, you know from her expression that she wants to tell the blonde that she's too stupid to live. Instead, she uses a demeaning tone to advise the blonde that she's in a library. Other than the blonde and the librarian, the rest of the patrons are men. They're of university age. They're studying, skimming through books, or working. They really don't pay much attention to the situation until the blonde turns to look around after being scolded by the librarian. The men glance at her briefly, and then go back to their books. This isn't a gleaming, modern, or well-lit library. It's dark and cluttered. You can almost smell the smoky, sweet odor wafting from the old books. After the blonde lowers her voice and whispers the food order, she looks up and smiles as if she's proud of herself for knowing how to practice library decorum. Then Mozart's Piano Concerto No. 21 begins, and the scene shifts, abruptly going from the dark, muted library to a startling white backdrop. The words "Beauty is nothing without brains" appears, and plays for 2 to 3 seconds. The contrast is so sharp it mentally knocks out the senses. And for the first time, Mercedes introduces their product, an E-Class luxury vehicle, white also against a white backdrop. I mentioned that I laughed the first time I watched the advertisement, but then I watched it again and again, and then again. After a while, it didn't seem so funny anymore. And while the ad appears to be silly and inconsequential, I argue that using the dumb blonde joke was a brilliant way for Mercedes to draw men, their intended audience, into the advertisement while feeding the male need for power, status, and control. Using humor was also a smart way to downplay the demeaning message that might have otherwise offended its female viewers. I laughed too, remember? The ad was eventually banned, and the reasons for this became clear, and my thesis supported, as I broke down the advertisement using Aristotle's 3 elements of rhetoric. In addition, I referred to a study in ambivalent sexism by Dara Greenwood and Linda Isbell. Using Erwin Panofsky's study of iconology, I closely dissected each visual object and also blended into it thoughts from Jimmy Killingsworth, Judith Butler, Sigmund Freud, Jeff Orr, Peter Lyman, and the Heath brothers. But before delving into the analysis, it's important to gain a clear understanding of the audience. The ad was first aired during the 2007 Super Bowl, and if the number of posts that still exist on the internet after all this time are any gauge of success, the ad certainly achieved its purpose. Mercedes knew their target market and used a perfect medium to reach it. In rhetoric, this refers to ethos, understanding audience values and tapping into their source of credibility. Men generally love sports. It supports the male drive to triumph by competing and winning. For 3 hours or so, male spectators become part of a fantasy that allows them to play part of athlete, warrior, and conqueror of sexy women. It also allows them to be what they believe they should be, if not necessarily who they are. Judith Butler argues that gender is socially constructed, and I agree. I do, however, believe that the changing roles of the traditional male have created a cognitive dissonance in identity, and that outlets such as the Super Bowl provide a buffer to the confusion. I also believe this dissonance is responsible for ambivalent sexism, which I will discuss further when I examine the essence of the dumb blonde joke. Panofsky's iconology delves into themes, meanings, and interpretations. It begs the questions, what and why? So what does ordering French fries, a burger, and a milkshake have in common with any part of this advertisement? Well, suddenly the blonde becomes a McDonald's customer, which places her in a social class beneath the librarian and any other library user. That the blonde thinks she's in McDonald's only heightens her appearance of ignorance, and her subsequent whispering leaves the viewer to wonder if she has any brains at all. Her actions take away her value as a woman and as a human being. Bombshells such as Marilyn Monroe and Jean Harlow gave basis to the notion that being blonde meant that they were ornamental, brainless, and an easy lay. No sense, no feeling, right? I will say something, however. The blonde's whispering the order the second time around did accomplish one thing. It came as a surprise. In other words, it was unexpected. One of the Heath brothers' success criteria for leaving a lasting impression. And it was the source of the chuckle. I found it interesting that when Red Touch Media interviewed Noel Thurman, the blonde in the commercial, in 2013, they asked her how she felt to be the most popular dumb blonde on the internet. She replied that it was always good to be popular in this business, that at least it wasn't a mugshot. I often wonder why a woman would want to devalue herself in this way, but that's another discussion and a whole other essay. The librarian is almost mannish in comparison to the perky blonde, and the contrast makes the blonde look all the more dumb. By virtue of her position of librarian, the woman is well educated, but the advertisers chose to make her ugly and unapproachable, and the connotation here is that to be smart, you can't be attractive. Because the men are positioned in the background, it could be interpreted that they are of secondary importance to the story. But this is far from the truth. First of all, there are no women in the background, only men. The men's presence and placement give a feeling of voyeurism, like they're out with their buddies watching a stripper perform. And in fact, the blonde has been stripped. Both women have. That one woman is smart but ugly, and the other beautiful but dumb, means each have been stripped of their value as humans. The scene and the lack of women students leaves no doubt that it's impossible for a woman to be simultaneously smart and attractive, and these boys are tomorrow's professionals, the status seekers. Another construct of the Mercedes strategy. The room's dark colors, wooden pieces, and leather chairs scream old boys club. It's a room where men learn to become professionals and women are not allowed. Except, of course, for the librarian, but only because she poses no threat to the sanctuary of the man's domain. She is utilitarian, devoid of sex appeal, and is a necessary part of the library's functionality. She's invisible. The blonde's smiling face fades as the music begins. That the song is a classical masterpiece again reinforces the stupidity of the blonde as she disappears into nothingness. The audience is taken from the dark of the library and into the light. The whiteness is angelical in its brightness, and the words that follow are like a proverb. Although unsaid, the message is clear. Buying anything other than a Mercedes E-Class makes you as stupid as the dumb blonde. And no man wants to look like that. If discourse theory creates truth through language, then what do the words, beauty is nothing without brains mean? What about the words dumb blonde? Level 3 of Panofsky's iconology goes yet another layer deeper and examines intrinsic meaning, social ideas, power, and identity. Had Mercedes used this woman in the Super Bowl advertisement, would it have commanded equal success? What if they allowed the dumb blonde segment, but afterwards showed this smart and beautiful woman climbing into the driver's seat of the E-Class? Would it have had the same punch? Would it have driven all customers to drive a Mercedes? She's classy, isn't she? And isn't that what the E-Class is all about? Wouldn't that message have resonated, made sense, given logos, Aristotle's third element of persuasion, to the advertisement? The answers are no, because the dumb blonde served a purpose. Her stupidity gave the Mercedes male audience power. But in doing this, didn't Mercedes take a risk of offending their potential women customers? The answer is yes. And why? Because they didn't care. Even with all the noise about gender equality, studies like the Catalyst chart shown above prove that men, 96% in fact, are still more likely to become executives over women. And the Mercedes E-Class is marketed as an executive car. And the joke? Well, it's simply a vehicle that allows men to have power over women, perhaps even allows them to play out a fantasy without the fear of rejection or having to feel guilty. Ambivalent sexism is created when the high incidence of both hostile and benevolent sexism exists. Hostile sexism occurs in men who feel women use their feminist ideologies or sexual power to control them. Benevolent sexism is the opposite. Benevolent sexists place women on pedestals, likening them to their mothers and daughters, and treat them as the weaker sex whom they have to take care of. And while their attitude smacks of chivalry and is born of perceived goodness, this type of sexism is equally destructive, if not more so than overt hostile sexism. It leads men to feel guilty for having sexual appetites and can lead to resentment and cognitive dissonance. Freud believed obscene and disparaging jokes were used by men as an outlet for their hostile feelings toward women. The jokes are aimed towards women who Freud suspected had sexually rejected the men in some manner. They're transmitted between two men, the hostile sender and a receiver, with the third party, the woman, being the target. In yet another study, Peter Lyman believes sexist jokes provide a buffer between sexual interest and the loss of control that accompanies intimacy and the fear of commitment. The dumb blonde joke addresses these issues. The hostile sexist gets his revenge by laughing at the source of his derision. The benevolent sexist is allowed to enjoy or even fantasize about having sex with a beautiful woman because the joke reduces the cognitive dissonance he may have for perhaps comparing all women to his mother. For men who are neither hostile or benevolent sexists, to them the ad is just plain amusing. And with this I conclude that in every sense this advertisement was intended not to be amusing, but to entice Mercedes' ideal customer into their showrooms. It supports men's need for power, status, and control, while simultaneously diminishing a woman's value.